explore how it supports legal compliance, and then how can you project plan an ISO 27701? And we'll introduce the aspect of ISO 27. So before we begin, having gotten this from the context that there definitely are requirements in regards to data protection, which have been highlighted by the regulator. And because of that, institutions in Uganda need to comply to these regulations. The regulations are highlighted in Article 27 of the Constitution, which was enacted in 1995, and this introduced the right to privacy. Further, Article 27 of the Constitution was further enhanced by the passing of the Data Protection Act in 2019. And this guaranteed the protection of privacy in a digital world. And then the data protection regulations were passed in 2021, again, to support the privacy and protection and complement the sectoral laws. Now, highlights of the law include the fact that institutions have to have evidence of adherence to data protection principles and establish and document the lawful basis via which they collect information. We are going to look at a bit about that. They also need to adhere to the data subject rights. So the regulations and the act enshrined certain rights for individuals or data subjects, and we need to make sure as organizations we are adhering to the data subject rights. We also need to appoint someone who will be called a data protection officer. And this person will be charged with making sure that data protection is well implemented in our organization. They have a program in place. They're doing certain things every day to make sure we are compliant with the law. Then we need to implement security for personal data. So whether that personal data is being collected in physical form, in digital form, we need to make sure that we have security measures to apply. Then we need to conduct data protection impact assessments. And a data protection impact assessment helps us to understand what type of data do we have, where is it being collected, what is it being used for, and what is the impact if that data were to leak. And then we need to provide notification in case of a data breach. So my data has been breached, or the institution, something has happened. How then do we notify both the regulator and the data subject? Now, in the act and in the regulation, it has enshrined certain principles. Those principles include things like accountability. So as a data controller or processor, you need to demonstrate compliance with all principles and obligations under the law. We're going to define what a data controller or processor is as we go along. Then we need to be fair and lawful as we are collecting information. So we need to make sure that we are letting people know what information are we collecting, why are we collecting it, how is it going to be used, and we need to do that in accordance with the law. We also need to enshrine a principle called minimality. So we're not asking for too much data. So you need to ask yourself, to be able to give this person a service or to be able to do a certain thing, how much of this person's data do I actually need? So you only collect what is needed. Then storage limitation talks about, if I no longer need the data, how can I make sure that I limit storage of that data? Because the longer you store the data, the more likely it is to leak. It also enshrines the principle of quality information. So when I am collecting data, when I'm processing data, am I checking quality checks? Am I checking that when somebody gives me their number and they tell me their number is 0757, blah, 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 I am making sure that that is actually being captured well. Then transparency. So if, for example, I am sharing that data with somebody else for the purpose of processing, am I being transparent? Am I letting the data subject know that this is what is going to happen to your data? Once you give it to us, it will move in this certain way so as to give you a service. And then security measures. Do I have the relevant security measures to be able to give, make sure that your data is protected? Now, as we have been implementing the law and for the DPOs out there and also auditors and risk people, we have noted that there are common challenges in operationalizing the data protection law or in making sure that your institutions are compliant. The first is lack of internal capacity and awareness. Something as simple as understanding what is personally identifiable data. We have seen that many people don't understand what exactly is it. You might find people talking about in general financial data, which might not necessarily be personally identifiable data. So the understanding of even simple concepts of what is personal data is still lacking in our organizations. And if the understanding of even what personal data is, then you might find that even how it is protected, how it can leak, then also becomes a problem. Then there is poor documentation and governance. So if I was to ask the 264 participants who have logged in, how many of you have data maps? So you're able to understand, this is the data I pick, this is where it's stored, this is how it moves. These are the people who have access. Very few people have documentation within their organizations of the data they have, how it's moving, how it is acquired, how it is deleted, and such kind of things. In addition, there are poor governance structures. So you can find that, for example, when it comes to allocating a DPO, you have allocated it to somebody who probably has other roles and might not take this as a key role. Additionally, you maybe do not have committees who are making sure that when data protection is talked about in the organization, it is something that people take seriously. So you don't have committees at a management level, you don't have committees at a board level, you don't have people like data protection champions. So in terms of your governance structure is weak to be able to implement a proper data protection framework. Then we've seen this a lot where you have fragmented IT and security practices. So you might ask the IT team, how are you managing access? They might tell you, okay, this is how we manage it. For system A, we manage it like this. For system B, it is managed like that. For system C, it's managed in a different way. You ask them for a policy on some of the practices that they have. They might not have the policies in place. You talk about things like backups, you talk about things like encryption, you talk about things like how you monitor and how you have logs and how you monitor those logs. They might not have answers that are holistic enough to show that from an IT and security domain, they have covered all the elements necessary. Additionally, there have been challenges with consent. So one of the things that is enshrined in the Act is the right to restrict, right? So when I come to you and you tell me, for example, you have invited me to an event and I do not want to have my picture taken, I need to have a way that I need to have a way that I can consent to my picture being taken and to my picture maybe being used in a certain way. When I come to an institution and you say as part of your HR practices, we actually share your information with a third party who does for us background checks. I need to consent to that. So most of the time, either we don't have practices of showing that people have consented to be able to have their data accessed in a certain way and used in a certain way. Then the issue of vendors and third parties come along because organizations don't work in an island. Most of the time, you will have people who will support you, from the guard at the door who, when I am accessing your premise, will take down my documentation, my ID, my telephone number. That is a third party. Now, the third party may misuse data that has been collected on your behalf. So the guard at the door might be taking pictures of your ID, maybe sending it to a certain political party, and you find yourself registered in a political party that you are never a member of. Now you can see that when you are accessing that area, you are accessing it for the purposes of accessing a certain office, not for the purposes of having your data sent to somebody else for another purpose. The other thing is budget and resource constraints. So often we see that, again, data protection, because of not being well understood, you will allocate the role to somebody. That person has not been appropriately trained, so they can only do as much as they think is necessary. They don't have the proper training, the proper guidance to be able to guide the organization in implementation of a framework. In addition, when it comes to security practices, you might need to budget for certain resources, things as simple as firewalls, things as simple as antivirus and anti-malwares, which prevent access to your systems, cost money, and sometimes organizations don't have that money to spend. Then there could be uncertainties around cross-border and data transfers. We just had a recent case where there are, I think, 3 individuals who had a complaint regarding how Google uses their data, and if they are registered with the local personal data protection office, and also if they have the right to transfer their data from use to Uganda to elsewhere. Then there could be lack of industry-specific guidelines. So we can see challenges in the medical industry. We can see challenges maybe in the education industry where you're dealing with child data. Those industries may require specific guidelines that might not be readily available. So when now we come and say, okay, we have all these problems, how can we ensure that as an organization, we are covering all our bases? So ISO is an organization, basically it is a network of national standardization bodies from 161 countries. Now, ISO basically publishes what are called international standards, and there are 24,000 international standards out there covering various topics. ISO standards are meant to solve business problems. So if I am having a problem of sustainability, there's an ISO standard for that. If I'm having a problem of information security, there's an ISO standard for that. So these are some of the common ISO standards. There's ISO 9001, which focuses on quality, ISO 14001, which covers environment, ISO 27701, which covers the privacy, and then ISO 27001, which covers information security. For the purpose of this webinar, we'll actually deal with 3. That is ISO 27001, ISO 31000, and ISO 27701. What you'll also notice is that these ISO standards tend to be related in the sense that they have what is called a common structure, meaning that if today I decide I need to implement ISO 27 and I go ahead and implement it, then next year I realize, okay, I would like to enhance my practices by implementing ISO 22301. There will be some commonalities so as to enable the standards talk to each other. Now, when you look at certification, what are some of the advantages? So first of all, it provides you with a way to comply. It ensures that when it comes to service delivery, you're able to improve your service delivery. And then it builds your stakeholder trust because people know that you have benchmarks with the best in class, and you're able to show that. It helps you to build resilience and recover faster from incidents, and also gain efficiency and improve your processes. So this, I started off with a highlight of ISO 27001. Now you will notice that the ISO standards have the name, that is the number, that is 27001. And then thereafter they have a year, which would be 2022, 2023, 2024, and so on and so forth. So the 2022 basically means that that is the current standard, which is which you can get certified against. But you can see that from here, this standard was published. It's an edition 3, meaning there were 2 other editions before it, and it has 1 amendment. So ISO standards are frequently reviewed for changes that happen. So the amendment that happened was a 2024 amendment to cover aspects of climate change. So this 2022 standard covers information security, cybersecurity, and privacy protection. Sorry, I forgot to mention that amendments can be major or minor amendments. So the 2024 version was a minor amendment. Hence, the standard for which you're certified against remains the 2022. Now, the 2022 version covers elements of cybersecurity, information security, cybersecurity, and privacy protection. So information security includes all aspects of information, from information which is financial, information in physical form, information in online form. Cybersecurity specifically looks at information in your digital space. So these are information on servers, information you access via the internet. So it connotates cyber, so cyber security. And then privacy protection. So privacy protection looks at protection of an individual against privacy risks. So it looks at protection of personally identifiable information. So what is the ISO 27 about? It helps you understand your information security risks, put appropriate controls, check that those controls actually work, and keep improving. Now, we have learned that the standard covers information security, cybersecurity, and privacy. The main difference between information security and privacy is security is about safeguarding of data, whereas privacy is about safeguarding the user's identity. So when I look at privacy, I'm more focused with who is Stella, what data do I know about Stella, what data can I use to identify Stella. So those could be various data points, and we are going to also look at it. So when we look at privacy, you can ask yourself, why is it that I need to be interested? Why is it privacy is important? So privacy protects the rights of individuals. So individuals have the right to control who sees or who uses their data. So Uganda recently had a census. I think this was 2024. Yeah. It was collected for planning, right? Now you can imagine if that data was then later reused for marketing or for surveillance without consent. So initially you are giving your data for one thing, census, and now it's reused. So privacy protection helps to embody the right to control who sees or uses your data. Then it prevents harm and misuse. So imagine, for example, that at lands, your records are leaked and someone impersonates you and fraudulently sells your property. So that harms you from an economic basis. It also harms you in case, that was ancestral property which had been passed down. It has a harm directly to you. It builds trust in institutions. So when we don't embody the issue of privacy, something as simple as a telco like MTN, Airtel, etc., who have been pushing things like Airtel Money, MTN Momo, if I am not able to trust that my SIM will not be swapped without consent, resulting in my mobile money being lost, then I will not trust those institutions. It helps, just make sure that people are compliant. So, for example, a financial institution is fined for sharing customer lists with a third-party loan app without consent. Then it supports the digital transformation agenda. So if I understand how my data is protected, I am more willing to give data to e-government services. I will be confident with how the government is utilizing my data. Then it empowers individuals. Recently, I had a case of somebody who came in for a job and they had a wrong name. And they explained to us that their names as was registered in NIRA was wrong. However, we didn't take that person up. Why? Because we are not able to verify what exactly they're telling us. And it was as simple as the name on your certificate is Ham, but the name on your NIRA is Humphrey. Now, those two names are different when it comes to verification of persons. So such kind of things, if we don't have a way in which people can correct their data, then people will lose out on opportunities simply because of privacy concerns. So when we are handling personally identifiable information, there are different elements of personally identifiable information. Things like your name, home address, email address can be used to identify you. These tend to be more sensitive. Things like passwords, your health data, your religion, your passport number, very sensitive. And then other less sensitive data, like for example, what I click, what websites I visit. This can be done through when we utilize IT systems and cookie systems, then it picks up information that helps to optimize the experience, but in a way it also tracks who we are. So what exactly is ISO 27701? It is an international standard that provides guidelines for establishing, implementing, maintaining, and continually improving a privacy information management system. And it's an extension of ISO 27001. What that means is that you cannot implement ISO 27701 without first implementing ISO 27001. So remember, we talked about ISO 27001, and we said it focuses on information security, cybersecurity, and privacy. Now, this then solely focuses on privacy, but it extends the requirements of ISO 27. What it's meant to do is define privacy roles and responsibility, identify legal basis for processing information, handle consent, and secure data throughout its life cycle. You can see that right now we are in edition 2019. However, it is under review, and we expect a new standard anytime now. So when standards are written, they are written in what we call families. So you will see that ISO 27 starts off with what you call the vocabulary, and the vocabulary will just give you terms and definitions. So if you want to understand certain terms that are used in the standard, you will go to the vocabulary. Then there will be what is called requirements. So requirements state what it is that the organization must put in place to be compliant with the standard. So the requirements are ISO 27001, which give you the ISMS requirements, and then ISO 27701, which gives you the PIMS requirements. Now, when you go into certification, and I want to be a body which certifies individual organizations, I need to also have passed a certain audit, and I need to be compliant with ISO 27006. So for today, I will not focus too much on that. Now, to be able to guide implementation of these two standards, the ISO also documents general guides. So general guides will give you a way in which you can understand the PIMS and the ISMS requirements, because the requirements are not very specific, but they are talked about in more detail when it comes to the guidelines. And then they could be specific guidelines for telecommunications, for health, that can help you if you're in those industries. Now, when you're implementing a standard, you will go through something called the PDCA, that is the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. So the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle can be used to implement any management standard. And by management standard, I mean ISO 27, ISO 22301, ISO 31, all the standards go through what you call the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. So in the plan, you understand the organization, you understand what is it that needs to be put in place in terms of policies, in terms of the privacy requirements that the organization has. Then we go into the do phase where we actually implement. So we go ahead and we implement the controls. We make sure they are working to support the privacy information management system. Then we check. So in the checking, what we are looking at is we need to put in place thresholds and monitoring mechanisms where we can understand when we say we want a privacy framework and we have planned a privacy framework and we have implemented it, the check actually allows us to understand, is this thing working? Yeah. Think about checking the same way that you maybe check your car from time to time. You go and you say, okay, is my car working from a perspective of, has it properly been maintained? Is the tires well, is the tire pressure okay? So that's checking. And then ACT is all about improving. So all standards follow the PDCA cycle. Now we are going into the meat of the things where we look at the standard itself and what it says. Remember, we said that the standard is an extension of ISO 27001. So when it comes to the first area of the standard, it tells you, look at ISO 27001 and then extend the requirements of ISO 27 to cover privacy. So it will tell you, go to 5.2. 5.2 is this context of the organization and understand what is the context. So when I'm talking about context, I'm saying, is this organization in Uganda only? Is it in Uganda, Burundi, South Africa, Nigeria, etc.? If so, what are the privacy requirements that we have to cater for? Because if I am in Nigeria and Uganda, I will need to comply to the Nigerian law. I will also need to comply to the Ugandan law. If I am transferring information from here to EU, I will need to comply to the GDPR. So I need to understand your context. I need to understand your interested parties. Interested parties are who would be interested to understand your privacy information management system. Then I need to determine the scope. Then I go to 5.3 and it tells me again, extend the requirements of ISO 27. So is my leadership team committed? Remember, we talked about committees within leadership who support the privacy agenda. We talked about having a DPO. We talked about maybe having board level oversight. That is all showing leadership and commitment. And then we talked about, having a privacy policy that we'll discuss. Then we go ahead and we plan out the privacy information management system. We look at privacy risks, privacy opportunities. We develop objectives, and we see how to do that. We also need to look at resources, where we look at resources from an aspect of financial resources. Remember, we talked about some of the challenges of implementing IT controls, of implementing some of the things we need to do. So those need resources. They also need competence. So people need to be competent in what they are doing. And then we will go to the operational planning and control, where we are going to implement the controls that are required for APIMS. And then we go into performance evaluation, which is more of saying, I have done all this from 5.2 up until 5.6. Is it enough? Is it working? Am I actually achieving my objectives? And then if we are not, we take a continual improvement methodology. Now, these are what you call the strategic requirements of ISO 27001. So it's kind of like setting your governance structure. Now, then when we go into clause 6, it will give you a control framework. So ISO 27 has a control framework covering 4 aspects, which are organizational controls, people controls, physical controls, and technology controls. So practically, there are 93 controls. And for each of those controls, it has specified what an institution needs to do. Now, remember, we had said ISO 27 covers information security, but 27701 covers privacy, information management. So we will go to each of those controls and say, for example, if we are looking at something like the organizational controls, and we have said that we need to ensure that data is appropriately labeled, so with a confidentiality rating, we will go down and say, is my personally identifiable data appropriately labeled? If we are going into people controls, and we've said one of the people controls has to be awareness. Are people, as part of when they are being brought into the institution, are they made aware of the data protection requirements, the data protection law, and how we've implemented it in our environment? If we are looking at physical controls, we look at when it comes to certain data that is PII in nature. So for example, I am taking a scan of your ID. How have I made sure that that information is well protected? And then for technology controls, we'll look at things like encryption of personally identifiable data, anonymization, pseudonymization, all those technology controls. So I've just given a highlight of some of the controls that are there. So if you go to the ISO 27, it will specify the PIM specific guidance for ISO 27002. Yeah. Now, when it comes to the standard as well, there is something called a PII controller and a PII processor. And I remember I had introduced this at the beginning of my discussion. So a PII controller is a person or a government body or an entity that basically determines the why, the purpose, and how the personal data is to be collected. So if I am a bank, for example, I will say, for you to open a bank account, I need your ID, I need your residence, I need maybe your next of kin. So I have decided for you to open a bank account, these are the minimum requirements I need to have. Now, as the controller, I may need to pass on that information to a processor for the purpose of completing the service. So for example, banks will usually pass on our data to a credit reference bureau in case we want a loan, so that they can verify that we don't have any adverse rating. So the processor acts on the instruction of the controller. So there are PII controllers, then there are PII processors. Now, you can be both. You can be both a PII controller and a PII processor. And it's necessary that you understand for certain services or for certain things that you do, are you a controller, are you a processor? And hence, what are the controls that apply to you? Now, ISO 27701 then has guidance for controllers as well as guidance for processors. So that if I am acting as a controller, I can take this and ensure that each of these control areas are well covered. And if I am acting as a processor for certain things, I can take this and be able to check, have I made sure that I have embodied all these requirements as I am processing on behalf of somebody else. So now that we've understood the ISO 27701 in general, I will just go to how you can set up a PIMS. I will try and go quite fast now because I can see I'm running out of time. So we use the Plan, Do, Check Act. So this is plan, you need to plan the PIMS, then implement it, then monitor and review, and then finally improve. So in planning, the first thing you understand is you have to do a gap assessment. So in the gap assessment, what you do is you take the standard, that is the ISO 27701, and you just go through each of the requirements and say, have you implemented this or not? If you've implemented it, how have you implemented it? You can give your rating. We usually call it a CMMI rating. It's a 1 to 5 rating, and it can say that, yes, I have implemented it, but it's at level 2, or yes, I've implemented it, it's at level 5. So you do a gap analysis against the requirements. Then once you have understood, your gap assessment, you'll document a scope of the PIMS. So the scope looks at the boundaries. Remember, we said privacy information management system focuses on personally identifiable data. So we have to understand, where is your personally identifiable data stored? And are you starting with a full scope or are you starting with a limited scope? So it's usually advisable to scope a limited scope at the beginning of your PIMS and get it right as you go along. So these are some of the best practices when it comes to scoping. So just look at your business objectives. If you already have an ISO 27, you can align your scope to that. Then identify where you're processing PII and the data flows. Define your role as an organization. Are you a controller? Are you a processor, or both? What are the legal jurisdictions that are applicable to you? And then document your scope. Then you'll go ahead, now that you have documented your scope, is to document a privacy policy. So the privacy policy highlights your overall commitment, or rather your organization's overall commitment towards protecting personal data. And this is signed off by your management team, typically your top management, sometimes the board. It is communicated both internally and externally. So institutions usually have a privacy policy or a privacy statement on their website. So it will include things such as the data you collect, the purpose, the legal basis, any sharing you're doing, retention, the securities you've put in general, cross-border issues, and the contact of the DPO. From the policy, you will go ahead and do a risk assessment. So a risk assessment helps you to identify. So if you look at the definition of risk, according to ISO 31000, it is the effect of, it is basically looking at what is my objective and what is it that can stop me from meeting my objective. So my objective is to ensure the privacy and protection of personal data. So when we are doing a privacy risk assessment, we are trying to understand what are the privacy risks I face. Now, when I am processing personal data, there are risks to an individual, then there are risks to an organization. So, for example, if my ID, I'm going to a building and I leave my ID and the guard takes a picture of my ID, sends it to a political party. I'm registered on that political party. They start sending me SMSs. I'm not interested in those SMSs. For me, as an individual, this is a nuisance to me. It's also probably if I didn't want to be part of that political party, it's a personal embarrassment to myself. For the organization, they might not be a big impact. Yeah. So when we are thinking about privacy risk, we have to think about the risk to the individual and also the risk to the organization. So you may already be doing certain risk assessments in your organization, security risk assessment, general risk assessments. The risk assessments you do in your organization are only considering probably the impact to your organizational objectives. When it comes to a privacy risk assessment, you have to look at the impact to myself as a person as well if that data was breached. Yeah. So I just gave an example of a CCTV risk assessment. So the purpose of CCTV is to prevent crime, monitor, etc. What kind of data is collected? Facial images, behaviors, vehicle details, who is affected? So they could be staff, they could be visitors. What's the legal basis for me to collect that information? So I could say I have a legitimate interest to be able to understand who was in my premise. I also maybe have a legal obligation to collect certain data. What are the key privacy risks? I can have invasion of my privacy if this data is being shared with others, misuse of footage, over retention, then lack of notice. So I don't know that I am being monitored. So what are the controls which need to be put in place? Maybe policy, maybe signage, maybe access controls, sharing rules only with law enforcement or under legal duty, subject rights, the right to know, maybe access the footage and object on a case-by-case basis. Who owns it? The facilities manager. And how often will it be reviewed? Once a year. So once we have done a risk assessment, we will document something called a statement of applicability. So the statement of applicability takes actually all the controls required by the standard and says control A721, let's say. Is it applicable to my organization? Yes or no? And is it implemented? Yes. And then I need to show how it has been implemented. So that helps you have a full control of exactly where you are from an organization perspective. Now, once you've done your risk assessment, you've done your statement of applicability, you'll be able to know which areas are missing controls. So you go into implementation of controls, where you are now picking every control, what's the requirement, and then what do I need to do? So this is a very simple example where you need to have records of transfer of PII. And the control says that the organization shall record transfers of PII to or from third parties. So what do you need to have? You need to have a PII transfer log. You need to have contracts and data sharing agreements. You have encryption and access controls. Where necessary, you can automate tracking and review logs. So this then just gives you another example. Then you need to make your staff aware. So awareness needs to be done at various levels, covering things like confidentiality so that people understand this information can't be left in open areas, consent issues, You know, just a few things, data retention. So these are just a few jokes that I came up with. Now, after you implement, you've made staff aware, people understand what you've done, why you've done it, how it supports the privacy agenda. You need then to set up measurement, monitoring, measurement and analysis. So you come up with metrics. So the metrics will tell you, am I doing well or am I not doing well? So for example, you can have a metric to say, I want to start to train 100% of my staff. If you have 200 staff members, and of those 200 staff members, only 20 of them appear for training, then you've only done a very small percentage of the staff who require to be trained. So you can see that on the issue of training and awareness, you're not doing so well. If, for example, you want to have privacy impact assessments completed for 10 areas, yeah, and you've only done one privacy impact assessment, then you know you're not doing well. So in terms of defining key performance indicators is about defining indicators that you can measure and you can monitor and you can say, yes, I am doing well, or I am not doing well, and this is what I need to do to improve. So then we go into continuous improvement, which is just an ongoing process. It's not a one-time process where you're saying, where I find deficiencies, I will improve. You will also find that as you're implementing the controls, certain controls will be at level 1, certain controls will be at level 5. So you will incrementally improve them. Maybe you get to level 2, level 3, level 4, that way. So these are some of the ways you can showcase continual improvement. Then you will do audits on your environment. So your audits will help you identify, do you have non-conformities? And when you look at non-conformities, are they major or are they minor? So this just gives you an example of major versus minor non-conformities. So if, for example, we have no records of consent, that could be a major non-conformity. If we have no documented privacy policy, it could be a major non-conformity. On the minors, we could have, for example, delayed privacy trainings for a few employees. We can have, maybe the objectives are not being reviewed annually. Those could be minor non-conformities. So the standard also requires us to do an audit of our PIMS implementation every year, and that audit must be done by an independent person. So what next? I know this has been quite a short session with a lot of information, and many of you will say probably I took you a bit fast. So the first thing is the standard is, it is quite detailed, and it takes a bit of time before you get to understand it. So get trained. What I could recommend is start off with ISO 27001 and then take the ISO 27701. That will help you to understand information security first, and then privacy information management system. Perform a gap assessment. So you can take the standard. The standard can be bought online, and you can do a gap assessment against the ISO standard just to understand, this is what the ISO standard requires, this is what I'm doing, what's the gap. Get your management trained and aligned. If you don't have an aligned management, it is very unfortunate you will not get anywhere, because management give you resources, management give you the mandate, the governance structure. So if your management is not aligned, it's very hard to implement. Then implement the controls and then take on a mindset of continual improvement. So I can hand over to, I know I've taken the full hour, and I'm sorry about that. I can hand over to Anita, and we can take a few questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Stella, for that very insightful presentation. Let's take some time for the questions. Please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A panel and we will pick them up from there. I noticed the question that has been the highlight is, how do I get certified? Maybe you could take that as we wait upon the other questions. Members, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the Q&A panel.
All right. So in terms of certification, there are two types of certification. So there is certification of persons, which means that I, Stella Simiyu, want to get certified as ISO 27701 lead implementer or lead auditor. So there is a course that you take. It is called, basically it's called the ISO 27701 lead implementer. It's usually a 5-day course, quite packed. And then thereafter, you have a bit of time. You're given the notes and everything, and you can be able to read and then prepare for the exam. Then you take the exam. The exam is a self-proctored exam, meaning that you can take it at any time when you're ready. For you to take the ISO 27701, I recommend that you first of all start with the ISO 27001, the lead implementer. Why? Because it is a continuation. So the ISO 27701 does not cover, the lead implementer does not cover the 27001 content in detail. So you first of all start with ISO 27001 lead implementer, and then go ahead and take the ISO 27701 lead implementer as well. So both courses take 5 days. There is also a self-study option. If you want to do the self-study option, you can take the self-study option. What I can ask is, if you want more details, you want a quotation, just write to this email here, the info.ug@sentinelafricaconsulting.com. I'll be able to reply back, giving you the full details of how you can get, the costing and the different options. So there are options if you're taking a public class, if you're doing a self-study, maybe you want to do it as a group training in your organization. So there are various options. There is also certification from an organization perspective. So as I was talking and part of my presentation, I showed you that Sentinel is ISO 27701 certified. So that means that we have gone through an audit to confirm we've implemented the controls for ISO 27701. So again, you have to first start with ISO 27, get certified for ISO 27, and then get certified for ISO 27701. So you need both certifications for you to be Privacy Information Management System certified. So for that, you go through a whole implementation, just as I had put it, the Plan, Do, Check, Act. And at the end, you do your own internal audit. Then there is a separate body which comes and does a certification audit, and then you get if you pass the audit, then you get certified as an organization.
Okay, thank you very much. There have been questions around the cost. I don't know if you would like to talk about that, or that is something they'll get if they reach out to the organization. And maybe as you take on that, you could also respond to this. How long does it typically take for an organization to implement the ISO 27701 standard?
Okay. So for the cost, I will recommend just write to me. I will be able to give you the options. Again, we just consider, are you coming as a group? Are you coming, do you want to do a self-study? So there are different options there. But the pricing ranges from $700 up until $1,600 per person. How long does it take to do an ISO 27701 implementation. That depends on a number of factors. So the first thing that usually defines it is how large your organization is. So if your organization is smaller, it typically takes a bit faster, and hence and also the size of your scope. Additionally, it also depends on what controls you have in place, especially when we do the gap assessment. We might find that already you have a lot of things which comply with the standard, or we might find that you have a few gaps here and there. So the gap assessment also tells us the journey you need to journey, but typically it takes five months to 1 year. That is the duration it takes. So 5 months, if we're able to do it quite fast, and that is up until certification. 1 year, if, for example, there are a lot of control areas missing, maybe a lot more, a bigger scope, it would take us 1 year.
Okay, thank you very much. Allow me close the session for the Q&A. It's exactly midday. Thank you so much, Stella, for today's presentation. You've really helped break down what many consider a complex standard into something really approachable, of course, especially in our local context, and we appreciate you for that. And to everyone who joined us today, we also thank you for joining us, and we hope this session gave you practical direction really on strengthening your privacy systems. Stella, I am going to get back to you for parting shots. And while that is happening, I am going to share a link in the chat, and members can give us this webinar. The feedback you give us helps us to make future webinars better for you. Over to you, Stella, for parting shots.
All right, so thank you so much, Anita. Thank you for allowing me to meet with your members and meet with your audience. It has been also a very good discussion for me. Just putting everything, some of the thoughts that I had on privacy down on this PPT. It is great that also we are embracing international standards so that we can make it better for, in terms of implementation guidance. So I'm just thanking everybody who has joined, and I'd be happy to do it again. I know that the subject can be a bit complex, and sometimes you require to just get further insights on it. So thank you so much. I really appreciate this and looking forward to more sessions.
Okay, thank you once again, and thank you to the members. I hope you have been able to click on that link and give us feedback. Please note that these webinars are normally every last Thursday of the month. I saw someone asking if something like this could be organized annually. And of course, we'll be sharing the recording or any other related resources very soon on the emails that you used to register for this webinar. Until then, thank you for your time and keep leading the way in data protection and privacy. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you, Stella. Bye.
Bye-bye.